Hello, everyone, and welcome back to April's Cozy Corner. Grab your coffee, your tea, and your blanket, and let's get cozy together. Today, we're talking about someone whose energy has always stood out to me, Keke Palmer. Not just because she's talented, but because there's something deeply refreshing about the way she moves through the world. In a time where so many people feel pressure to perform, shrink themselves, or become more palatable to others, Keke Palmer has remained unapologetically herself. And I think there's something really powerful about that. So tonight, we're going to talk about her journey, her resilience, her confidence, and the lessons we can learn from someone who refused to lose herself while growing up in the spotlight. This is the power of being unapologetically yourself. Keke Palmer. Keke Palmer was born Lauren Kiana Palmer on August 26, 1993, in Harvey, Illinois, and raised in Robbins, Illinois, near Chicago. Before the fame, before the interviews, before the memes and viral moments, she was just a little girl with a huge personality and a dream. Her parents were both former actors, and even though they weren't rich or deeply connected in Hollywood, they recognized her talent very early. One thing that stands out about Keke's story is that she didn't come from privilege in the way many people often imagine celebrities do. Her journey was built on persistence. And I think that matters because people sometimes see confidence in someone and assume they've always had it easy. But confidence and ease are not always the same thing. Sometimes confidence is something people build because they had to. As a child, Keke began performing in church and quickly developed a love for entertaining people. You can tell even in old clips of her that she had this natural charisma, not forced, not robotic, not overly polished, just alive. And that authenticity would eventually become one of her biggest reasons people connected to her. At just 11 years old, she landed a role in Barbershop 2 alongside Queen Latifah and Ice Cube. From there, things started moving quickly. But one of the most important turning points in her career came with the film Akilah and the Bee. That movie changed everything. Keke played Akilah Anderson, a young black girl from South Los Angeles competing in the National Spelling Bee. And even now, years later, that role still means something to people. Because Akilah wasn't just smart. She was vulnerable, insecure, gifted, pressured, and afraid. She represented so many children who are trying to navigate difficult environments while carrying enormous potential. And I think a lot of people connected emotionally to that story because many gifted children grow up feeling isolated, especially black children, especially sensitive children, especially children who feel different from everyone around them. The movie explored fear, self-worth, education, community, and believing in yourself despite limitations. And Keke carried that role with emotional depth far beyond her age. Watching her in that movie now, it's almost impossible not to notice how emotionally expressive she was. Some people perform, but some people feel what they're saying. Keke has always felt emotionally present, and I think that's part of why audiences stayed connected to her over years. There's also something beautiful about watching young black girls see themselves represented as intelligent, capable, emotional, and complex human beings, not stereotypes, not side characters, not background noise, but centered. Aquila and the Bee gave many young girls permission to believe they could be both soft and brilliant at the same time. And that matters because sometimes the world teaches people, especially women, that they must sacrifice parts of themselves to be accepted. Be smart, but not intimidating. Be confident, but not loud. Be emotional, but not too emotional. Keke Palmer never fully fit inside those boxes. And instead of shrinking herself, she learned how to own her energy. After Aquila and the Bee, Keke's career continued to grow rapidly. She became one of the youngest black women to star in her own sitcom on Nickelodeon with True Jackson, VP. And for many millennials and Gen Z viewers, Keke Palmer became part of their childhood. But growing up comes with a unique kind of pressure. Because while most people are allowed to make mistakes privately, child stars grow up under constant observation. People watch your appearance change, your personality evolve, your awkward phases, and your emotional struggles, all publicly. And I think many child stars struggle because they never fully get the chance to discover themselves away from an audience. Imagine trying to figure out who you are while millions of people constantly project expectations onto you. That's exhausting. But what's interesting about Keke is that despite growing up in entertainment, she somehow managed to maintain a very human quality about herself. She laughs loudly, she jokes naturally, she expresses herself openly. She doesn't always feel overly manufactured in the way celebrity culture often encourages people to become. And maybe that's part of why people connect to her so strongly online now. In a world where many public figures feel carefully curated, Keke often feels emotional accessible, like someone who still remembers how to be a person outside of branding. As Keke Palmer got older, one of the biggest challenges she faced was transitioning from child star to adult woman in the public eye. And that transition is often much harder than people realize because audiences love watching young stars grow up until they actually grow up. Then suddenly people become uncomfortable. People start criticizing how they dress, how they speak, how they express their sexuality, and their confidence, especially women, especially black women. Keke eventually moved into music, hosting, acting, and multiple entertainment spaces at once. And while some celebrities become boxed into one identity, Keke always seemed determined to explore different versions of herself creatively. But with that came criticism. There were moments throughout her career where people underestimated her talent or treated her like she wasn't serious enough. And I think part of that came from her personality. Keke is expressive, funny, energetic, and charismatic, but sometimes society struggles to take joyful women seriously. Especially outspoken black women, there's this pressure in Hollywood for women to appear polished, controlled, quiet, mysterious, and perfectly curated. Keke never fully fit into that mold, and instead of shrinking herself to fit what people considered classy or acceptable, she leaned further into being herself. One of the deeper conversations connected to Keke Palmer's career involves colorism in Hollywood. And this is something many black women immediately understood when Keke spoke openly about feeling overlooked despite being talented for many years. Colorism is the preferential treatment of lighter-skinned individuals within communities of color and within media systems. And Hollywood has a long history of rewarding certain kinds of beauty while sidelining others. Keke has spoken before about feeling like she had to work twice as hard to receive the same recognition. And many people connected deeply to that because they saw the pattern too. Here was someone who could sing, act, host, perform comedy, connect emotionally, and command a stage, and yet people still often treated her like she wasn't fully that girl in mainstream Hollywood conversations for years. That kind of thing can affect people emotionally more than outsiders realize. Imagine constantly being talented enough but still feeling subtly overlooked, still feeling like you have to prove your value repeatedly. I think a lot of women, not just celebrities, understand that feeling, especially black women, especially darker skinned women, especially women who are expressive instead of reserved. There's this exhausting pressure to constantly earn visibility. But one thing I admire about Keke is that she continued building anyway, even when people underestimated her, even when people tried to reduce her. Even when recognition didn't fully match the level of talent she carried. That's resilience. One of the most fascinating things about Keke Palmer is how she adapted to internet culture without completely losing herself to it. Over time, she became incredibly meme-worthy online. People loved her facial expressions, her interviews, her reactions, her humor, her relatability. And in many ways, the internet finally started embracing the personality she'd always had. But internet culture is strange because sometimes people celebrate you while simultaneously reducing you to entertainment. A person becomes reaction images, viral clips, funny moments, trending sounds, and eventually people forget there's still a human being underneath it all. I think social media creates this pressure where people feel they must constantly perform to remain visible. Be funny, be desirable, be relatable, be marketable. Over and over again, and that kind of pressure can become emotionally exhausting. But Keke often still seems grounded in herself despite all of that. And maybe that's because she doesn't seem afraid of being perceived. A lot of people are terrified of embarrassment, terrified of judgment, terrified of looking awkward. But Keke Palmer often carries herself with a kind of freedom that says, I'm going to fully exist anyway. And that energy is rare. When Keke Palmer became a mother, many people saw another layer of her emerge. Motherhood often changes people deeply. It softens some things, strengthens others, reveals emotional truths. But unfortunately, even during motherhood, Keke faced public scrutiny surrounding her relationship and personal life. And I think situations like that reveal something painful about society. People often feel entitled to women's emotional lives, especially public women. The internet watches relationships, breakups, pregnancy, motherhood, and emotional reactions, almost like entertainment. But behind every viral moment is still a real person trying to navigate life emotionally. What stood out to many people was watching Keke slowly choose herself publicly. And that's not always easy because leaving situations, setting boundaries, or reclaiming yourself can feel terrifying when millions of people are watching. But there's a power in realizing peace matters more than performance. And I think many women connected to her during that time because they saw someone learning in real time. That self-worth sometimes means walking away from environments that diminish your spirit. The reason Keke Palmer resonates with so many people isn't just because she's talented, it's because she feels emotionally alive. She reminds people that you can survive difficult things, evolve publicly, be expressive, and also be soft, and still deserve a space in this world. In a culture that constantly pressures people to become brands instead of humans, Keke Palmer reminds people there is still power in authenticity. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Being unapologetically yourself is not about being fearless. It's about refusing to abandon yourself just to make other people comfortable. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here in April's Cozy Corner. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.